Fall is in the air, and there really is nothing like a home team advantage. That's why Team Toyota makes an obvious choice for your next vehicle purchase or service. With their MVP pricing guarantee, teammates reward program, and streamlined customer experience, their award-winning sales and service departments are there for all of your vehicle needs. A home team advantage is nothing without family and community. Their employees are part of the family, part of your town, and we're all part of the team. Visit teamtoyota.net and choose one of 3 locations in Langhorne, Glen Mills, or Princeton. Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening to the Phillies Talk podcast. I'm Corey Seidman. He's Ricky Bottalico, and we're in the middle of the winter meetings week here. Baseball's world has descended. Nashville is the scene. And Ricky, there hasn't been a lot of activity. It's actually kind of funny how little has gone on so far. You know, we're sitting down to record this on Wednesday morning, and baseball's been frozen by the Shohei Ohtani situation. It's kind of silly just reading some of these stories coming out just about how is the fact that the Dodgers acknowledged meeting with Shohei Ohtani going to affect their ability to get him? And there haven't been any major dominoes yet, but this is typically the time where groundwork is laid for major moves, or sometimes major moves even happen. The Phillies went to the winter meetings last year and spent nearly $400 million.
Yeah, I don't really expect that from the Phillies this year. It's very strange because Dave Dombrowski is one of those guys. He is one of those guys that wants to go in there and spend. I think he's pretty happy with what he has at this given time right now with the Phillies. I don't like the run it back thing. I never have. But, I mean, this is a team that came close 2 years in a row. He has a good belief in this club. He has a good belief in Rob Thompson. Obviously, they signed him for another year. But, yeah, with the whole thing in the winter meetings right now, it's always that one domino. And when is that one domino gonna fall where everybody else will fall kind of into place after that? Because these teams don't want to force out the money if they're not going to have it. I mean, obviously Shohei Ohtani is going to cost a lot of money. Masamoto is going to cost a pretty penny for some teams. And if they don't know where the first domino is going to fall, they don't know what they could spend. So what you're going to see is once Shohei Ohtani goes, it's going to go quickly, and you got to be ready to act. If you're any team around the big leagues, you got to be ready to act immediately.
Yeah, the other big storyline is Juan Soto, his trade market. The Yankees have been reported to be after him, and they made a trade for Alex Verdugo during the winter meetings, and some were speculating that the Yankees could then flip him for Juan Soto. It appears the Phillies are not in on Soto. It was a pipe dream all along, a long shot. He would have been a great fit because his skill set is exactly what this Phillies lineup needs to add, which is another big bat who can control the strike zone, can control at bats, has plate selection. Soto has it as much or more than anyone in all of baseball, but that would have been such a costly trade. I mean, I'm not closing the door on it just yet, but when you think about what that would have cost, you probably would have been looking at multiple top pitching prospects, a young player who's able to contribute right away like a Rojas or a Marsh, plus taking on a bad contract, plus then having to sign Soto for like $400 or $500 million. So it's not just as easy as there's a really good player out there, let's go get him. There's so many other factors in play.
Soto's a great player. Obviously, there's a lot of teams out there that want him. And I think Philadelphia fans, here's what they love to do. We want him, and him. And right now it's like Masamoto, Shohei Ohtani, Mike Trout, who is definitely off the market. It was said yesterday. And then Soto. It's like you can't have everybody. That's just not how the game works. And you look at the Phillies, I mean, they just started growing their minor league system when you really think about it. During the Clentak years and Gabe Kapler years, that was going downhill quickly. And now when you look at it, you're saying, well, they got some prospects coming up. They got some really good pitching prospects if they could stay healthy. We saw what happened to Painter last year. And do you really want to go after somebody right now? I mean, the Phillies have a pretty potent offense. I think that's fair to say now. Do you really want to go after a Juan Soto, who, like you said, is going to cost you, number one, all that money. Number two, it's going to be another long-term deal. And number three, it would probably cost you Abel, maybe even Painter to go along with that. I just don't think I just don't think that's a great move for the Phillies. You have to keep something in your minor league system. And if the Phillies were to drain it right now, it's just a bad move.
Yeah, maybe if they didn't do the Turner move a year ago, they could have been in play for Soto. But you just wonder, like, how many 300 million plus contracts can one team fit? It would be unprecedented to have, three of them on the same roster. But Soto, again, a rare free agent, not a free agent yet. His walk year is this year, but a guy who's only like in his mid 20s. He's about 2 years younger than Bryce Harper was when the Phillies signed him. But, short of that, right? We know what the Phillies' needs are. They need a reliever to replace Craig Kimbrell. They feel pretty good about most of their bullpen. The top free agent bullpen arm is Josh Hader. Now, that's a name that's going to excite a lot of people because Josh Hader is one of the best closers in all of baseball. He's really been one of the most overpowering relievers we've seen over the last 20 years in terms of strikeout numbers, his ability to hold guys from both sides in check. But Josh Hader's contract might be the richest ever for a reliever. He might exceed the $103 million that Edwin Diaz signed for. And like when you're talking about $110 million or so for a closer, even though the Phillies are at the point of their winning curve where an elite closer makes sense to have, that just seems like too much money for a guy who is not known as like a bulldog who's going to take the ball every single day.
No, he doesn't want the ball every day. I mean, he's got this self-implemented theory of when he could pitch, when he can't pitch, when he needs days off. I wish it was like that when I pitch. Hey, I don't feel like pitching today. Let's move on to tomorrow. Yeah, I think you want a guy in there that wants to take the ball every day. I think that would be your closer. I don't know if there is really that other closer out there, though. I mean, there are some guys that could fit into this relief core. But when you think about a straight up closer, I mean, there's not a ton of them. It's odd because baseball has changed that a lot. When you look around teams, like the first thing that comes to your mind is not necessarily a closer. Besides maybe a Hader. I mean, I think you looked at Craig Kimbrell as one of those guys who was a closer, but then he started getting faded off of that also. I mean, there's just not a lot of guys out there now that are strictly closers. I think what you have to look for is a strong arm, somebody that could come in, give you 65 games, and not complain about the job that he's doing, whether it be setting up for somebody. Because in all honesty, I think Alvarado should be the closer. I think Jose Alvarado has the stuff. How many blow-up games does he really have a year? 2, 3? I mean, when you look at it in that sense, he's a closer by definition. And I think he could get the job done. I think Sir Anthony has a bounce-back year. Hoffman was outstanding last year. And I just think they need that one added guy to mix in with all of those guys. And I think they could get the job done. They got plenty of guys that have done the job in the ninth inning, which includes Soto also. So, I mean, you just look at this bullpen right now. I could live with it. I really could live with it if you add one more arm.
Well, so you mentioned that you think Alvarado would be ready to step into that closer's role. And I think in terms of his skill set, yes, and his mentality, yes. I mean, he's a guy who has that adrenaline factor that helps him. And the question is just the Phillies have been so they've been so against naming a specific closer because they like their ability to mix and match. And particularly with Alvarado, Rob Thompson likes being able to use him whenever the situation calls for it, whether it's the 7th inning or the 9th inning. When it's the playoffs, he uses Alvarado in the 5th and 6th inning. So I guess, do you think there would be more value out of naming him the closer at the beginning of the year and giving him that job and figuring out who becomes that other Swiss Army knife that Alvarado was? There aren't a whole lot of guys like him that can throw 99 and miss bats from both sides,
Right. What Rob Thompson tries to do, he tries to match up his best players against the best hitters coming up. I don't think it's necessary. I know a lot of people say it's a lefty-righty thing with him and Dominguez out there. I don't think that's the case. I think the case is Rob Thompson knows who his best reliever is. He wants to match him up with the best hitters coming up, whether it be in the 7th, 8th, or 9th innings, and then go from there. That's why I was saying, I don't know, like Josh Hader would be why? I mean, why would you spend all that money? if he's just going to be that ninth inning guy, I guess it would make Rob's job easier in a sense like that, but I don't think that's going to happen. I think Rob Thompson is going to stick to the way he's going, which is why I said you just add an extra arm. You bring in a guy that can close out games, but is not necessarily always a closer. A hard thrower, obviously. I think that's the first thing you're going to look for. You're not going to look for a little thumber up there kind of flipping up curveballs all day long. Phillies don't need one of those. I think it's just one of those things where you piecemeal, you look at your bullpen, you say, okay, I have 3 guys right now that can close. If I get a 4th one who has done the job at times but isn't necessarily a closer, I'd be pretty happy with that. I think that's what Rob Thompson and the Phillies need to do.
Beyond Hader, the most intriguing free agent reliever is probably Jordan Hicks, a guy who throws 100-plus miles per hour. He's 27 years old. He hasn't been like a full-time closer throughout his career. He's moved back and forth as like a setup man. Sometimes he's closed for the Cardinals. Coming off a very good season, ERA in the low 3s, and he was even better with the Blue Jays later in the year. The thing with Hicks is that a lot of teams are after him, and there are teams that are probably going to offer him flat out the closer's role, which might appeal to a guy more than not knowing specifically what his role would be. I would think that Hicks is also probably in line for like $12 million at least a year over at least 4 years. I mean, given his age and the just the supply and demand of the relief market, do you think that's more realistic? The Phillies have not been heavily connected to Hicks so far, and they could, there's also an indication that they could play in a tier below that where there are, right-handed relievers who are not necessarily closers or even dominant setup men, but they're, they can be the 4th best reliever in your bullpen or the 5th best guy. Does that do enough?
Well, the one thing that Dave Dombrowski's been doing, if you think about it, and he's got a very good pitching coach staff that if you find a hard thrower that is a little wild, he's been able to fix those guys. You think about Soto, you think about Alvarado. Those are guys that were those type of players. I mean, in my opinion, I think this is the time, this is the place. If you have to go with 3-year 36 for a guy like Hicks, I think I might take that shot right now. I mean, you're talking about a window. Look, the window's open. They've been in the World Series. They went to the NLCS. The window is there. The window is now. How many years is that window going to stay open is the question. And if you think it's going to be 2 or 3 years, then you go and do that. I mean, I've also, you hear talk about different relievers. I don't want to go lower tier. I think they already have that guys they can bring up from the minor leagues, Ryan Kirkering. They already have that. Do you really want to go down that road and just say, well, this is a guy that might be able to do the job? You can't have that. This is not the time. This is not the place to say, okay, well, maybe. No, maybe's no good anymore. I mean, they have to get over a hump this year. And I think that's pretty fair to say. And I think if you ask these players on the team, they would say the same thing. I mean, Rob Thompson didn't watch the World Series. Why? Because he was disgusted that they weren't in it. I mean, so I just think if you believe this is the time, this is the place, which I think everybody does, then you go and get a guy like Hicks.
And the Phillies need to come out of this offseason with a reliever better than Kimbrel in that Kimbrel role. I mean, they need quality. Kimbrel was pretty good in the regular season last year. I know that everybody remembers how it ended, and it ended in spectacularly awful fashion for Kimbrel and the Phillies. He did have a good regular season, ERA in the low 3s, finished a lot of games, finished 45 games for the Phillies. They need someone even better than that in that role so they can feel even more comfortable in October. Hicks, I see MLB Trade Rumors projects a 4-year, $40 million contract for him. That's what they projected before the offseason. I personally think it's going to go a little higher than that just because so many teams need that. So many teams are obsessed with velocity, and he has it, and he's 27 years old. I, too, if it's in that range, if it's 10 to 12, $13 million over a 3-4 year deal, I, too, think the Phillies should seriously consider that as long as he has the interest in coming here as well. Again, no indication that they've heavily pursued Jordan Hicks to this point. They're kind of just sitting back and surveying the market. Dave Dombrowski's admitted that that's what they're doing in Nashville, that they don't have any glaring holes they feel they need to fill right away. They got their major lift out of the way before Thanksgiving by signing Aaron Nola to that 7-year deal. And now they're kind of just seeing what opportunities present themselves. Beyond Hicks, there's like the older group, Liam Hendricks, David Robertson, Hector Neris, guys like that.
They've been there, done that, guys. No, I'm done with that. I think they tried that last year in a sense with Kimbrel, and it kind of gets to the point where like, all right, are they going to do this every year? Because a couple of years before that, it was Robertson, and it hasn't really worked out to benefit the Phillies doing that. Very
Workman.
So,
you could bring back Brandon Workman, give him the
Mr. Curveball.
So
Mr. Home Run.
All right, so that's the bullpen situation. I mean, the other obvious area where the Phillies are going to look is, another bat, ideally someone who can play outfield, but it doesn't seem like they want someone who's just like a clear-cut outfielder. They want someone who has versatility. They don't want to completely block Johan Rojas. They don't want to completely block him from seizing that everyday job if he hits enough, whether it's in spring training or in the minor leagues early in 2024. So if like you sign an outfielder to a 3-year contract, that is going to limit the number of reps you can give a guy like Rojas. Someone who sticks out to me just in terms of versatility would help even if he's not playing the outfield every day is Whit Merrifield. And I feel like I've been beating this drum for like the last 8 years because, Whit Merrifield has gone from an underrated asset to a handsomely paid player. Now he's older and he's coming off of a pretty strong season. He and the Blue Jays declined a $18 million mutual option to begin the offseason, which would indicate that Merrifield feels that he's going to get more money. He's going to get like a 2 or 3 year deal at a number similar to that, or maybe even a slightly larger 1-year deal. What do you think of that? Is there anybody on the free agent market in terms of position players that sticks out to you?
There's not a ton. I mean, you go up and down. That I know a lot of people will look at like WAR and this and that, but I mean, you look at left fielders. I don't even know, is Lourdes Gurriel still out there? Yeah, I mean, a guy like him, Tommy Pham. I mean, these are guys that are. There's no big names, and if you're going to do this, you don't really need a big name. I think Whit Merrifield, he's been talked about in Philadelphia for 3 or 4 years now that they want him on this team. It just doesn't happen as easily as they can. And if you're waiting for dominoes to fall, now you're talking about the lower end guys. And you're going to start. We're going to start hearing Travis Jankowski again. Which no, the answer is no to that now.
He's a World Series champion.
Michael A. Taylor was coming up a lot. And that would not be a bad move by the Phillies.
I would say to Michael A. Taylor, how much more offense are you getting out of Michael A. Taylor than you get out of Johan Rojas? I mean, Michael A. Taylor, he's been a center fielder all these years because he has elite defense, and every once in a while he can have like a hot offensive week. But he's another guy who's like a 220 hitter, low OBP. At that point, I would just start Rojas at that point.
Well, I mean, unless you're fishing in the big tank. Do you know what I mean? I don't think the Phillies are doing that. I'm sorry. This is the first year where I actually felt like the Phillies aren't going to go for that big name or go into that big tank and say, oh, we could grab him for cheap. That doesn't happen anymore. I just think it's going to be one of these guys again. If it's not a Whit Merrifield, then maybe Lourdes Gurriel. But what is he at? I mean, he's got a little bit of power, but I mean, where are we really going here? What are you really looking for? You have guys in your lineup: Trey Turner, Schwarber, Harper. Those guys should be adding the power. These guys should be your beneficial players. I mean, in all honesty, you should look for a veteran bat that could come off the bench. That's what this is really going to come down to in the end.
And the other piece of it with players like Tommy Pham, Lourdes Gurriel Jr. is, and especially this early in the offseason, they're going to want an opportunity to play every day. And the Phillies aren't going to be able to directly offer that. Like if they were to say, if they were to go to Tommy Pham and say, oh, we can give you 1 year, $12 million, but you're going to be like a 3rd/4th outfielder. You might get 375 plate appearances or 450 compared to 600. Well, like, does that entice you when it's this early in the offseason? You might be able to find a similar deal with more playing time.
No, it doesn't.
Yeah,
it doesn't. I mean, as a player, what's the one thing that you want to do? You want to come in and play. If you think about it, those bench players get signed in early February or late January, early February, late January. That's when you're going to find the players that couldn't get that contract that they wanted. And they're going to have to settle either for a 1 year or a 2 year deal with your team. That's what you look for. And I think Dave Dombrowski's very smart about this. He'll see the players that are falling through the cracks, and he'll know what players will be available at certain times. But I mean, I just don't know. I mean, I would not call this the biggest bowl of free agency I've ever seen. This is a very thin layer of free agency. You get through the first one or two guys at each position, that's it. And let's face it, Phillies are not going after a Cody Bellinger. They're not looking into something like that. If imagine that he falls there, no, I don't think that's happening. But and when that happens, I think it just puts you in a spot where you have to wait. And when you wait, that's where you get the cheaper players at the end of the game.
Yeah, well, they spent $387 million a year ago at the winter meetings. They signed Trey Turner, Taijuan Walker, Matt Strahm. They came out of the Rule 5 draft with Noah Song, who was like a really interesting Rule 5 pick, and obviously not as much activity this winter, but you can't do that every offseason. They've signed a ton of stars. They've signed Castellanos, Schwarber, Turner, Harper, Realmuto, Nola, Wheeler. You don't build a team of 26 guys making $20 million a year, you know?
But that's what the fans want. I mean, that's what they want. That's what they think a team is now. And it's just not. It's not business smart. It's not it doesn't deal with it.
I think they've also seen, though, that like a key piece of the Phillies' ability to contend the last 2 years hasn't only been the production of the veterans, it's also been the other guys stepping up, like Stott and Bohm. There are other players that the Phillies are going to need to step up and be better in 2024 than they were in 2023. We mentioned one earlier in Gregory Soto, a piece of that bullpen puzzle. To me, in terms of the talent and the stuff compared to the results we saw, he was extremely disappointing in his first year as a Philly. An ERA of 4.62, despite not putting a lot of guys on base, despite cutting his walk rate almost in half, despite striking out more than a batter per inning and having that fastball that can hit triple digits. He just never seemed to get it going consistently. Sometimes it was strike throwing. Sometimes it was missing in the middle of the plate. He had a lot of those blow up outings. You referred to them earlier with Alvarado. Yeah. When things went bad for Soto, they went like really bad. And that's a guy that if he can come in this year and he can give you an ERA in the mid to high twos, that in itself is almost like a free agent addition because you're getting a much better reliever than you got a year ago.
I'm going to say something, and I'm going to make this a little easier. I look at Soto, and if you remember, Alvarado went down, Sir Anthony was down. He had to pick up all that slack. And when he picked up the slack, he was pitching fine. All of a sudden, as the season started to wear, what happened? He wore down quickly. I mean, that's where you got to be very careful with your relievers, because nowadays you can't send them out there for 75, 80 games. They don't work like that. Their bodies break down. And if you do try to do that, or you put them on a pace like that, you're going to get blow-offs. And I think Soto blew up more because he was picking up a lot of slack early on in the season. And then he just hit a brick wall. Once you hit that brick wall, it's hard to jump over that wall. And it takes a long time to get your stuff back. Even if with rest, that doesn't necessarily help it. But you have to put things into perspective. I think he could come back and have a good year as long as everybody else in that bullpen stays healthy with him. So I think like it's almost like a cog in a machine. One cog breaks, the other one's going to break at some point.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's a fair point. He was Soto, like one of their only bullpen guys who stayed healthy all year, in terms of the leverage guy. So he was able to post and deserves credit for that as well. Celebrity cook Steve Martirano brings his Italian-American cooking back home to Philly. Enjoy Martirano's Prime at Rivers Casino and Steve's famous meatballs with Sunday gravy, prime steaks, and more. Make reservations for Martirano's Prime on OpenTable. Okay, so the Phillies payroll, Ricky, the luxury tax threshold, the first luxury tax threshold next season is going to be $237 million. The Phillies, from a luxury tax perspective, are already right around $250 million. So it's going to be their highest payroll ever, even, if they don't really do anything of note the rest of the offseason. Plus, you think about whatever in-season additions they might make. The Braves are another team that is increasing spending. The Braves are going to be right up against the luxury tax, if not over it. I think it will be their first time in franchise history. And they haven't made any big splashes yet. They acquired Jared Kelenic from the Mariners. He's going to be their left fielder. They signed a couple of relievers, Joe Jimenez.
Yep.
They brought him back. Reynaldo Lopez, I believe they signed as well. But it sounds like they have another move up their sleeves or multiple moves up their sleeves. And Alex Anthopoulos, their president of baseball operations, he had a good quote earlier this week saying, all I can point to is that with our moves, you usually don't hear about them ahead of time. They don't leak. The Braves do act in silence. You think back to a lot of the trades and signings they've been able to make over the last 5 years, they come out of nowhere. Is there anybody out there that you think the Braves could add that would really increase the gap between them and the Phillies?
I think, in all honesty, I think their lineup's great. I don't think they need anything in the lineup. If they go and get a Blake Snell or somebody like that in the top end guys, I think that could scare people a little bit. They definitely need starting pitching because every year we've gotten to the playoffs, what happens to them? Either their pitchers aren't healthy or they only have 2 starting pitchers that can go. So, in my opinion, I think they have to add to their starting pitching, whether it be through a trade, whether it be through free agency. I mean, the free agency is a little thin. There's a lot of older guys in free agency this year to go after, but you still have guys like Blake Snell out there. But I mean, Marcus Stroman maybe would be interesting for them. But like you said, the Braves aren't leakers. They just wait and see, and they go after what they want. And I mean, I'm looking at the the free agent market right now, and you're talking about guys. I mean, Carlos Carrasco. You have Noah Syndergaard. I mean, these are all guys the Phillies have seen, done, and they're just kind of getting older. Vince Velasquez, you're going to go after him?
That could decide the NL East in 2024. Who signs?
Yeah, it could be everything. No, but I just don't know if there's that. I don't think there's that besides Blake Snell. I don't think there's that one guy that could really pump that team up any more than they are, unless they make a trade.
Yeah, and that's what scares you. That's what scares you about the Braves. They always have so much trade ammunition as well. It's not just free agency. They can also explore some trades. But when you look at like the landscape of the NL East for next season, it's going to be much different than it was entering this past season. Entering 2023, it was a 3-team race. The Mets had the highest payroll in the history of baseball. They had a Scherzer, Verlander-led rotation. The Phillies were seen as the 3rd best team in the division. I remember when like the win totals came out, the over-unders around this time last year. The Phillies were in that 87 range compared to the low to mid 90s for the Mets and Braves. This year or next year, 2024, looks like more of a 2-team race. Braves and Phillies. The Braves were the class of baseball in the regular season a year ago. The Mets have made so many trades to sell off pieces. There's also the potential they might trade Pete Alonso at some point. Who knows how competitive the Mets are going to be? The Nationals obviously are not in the phase of their cycle where they're going to be spending to add players. The Marlins, Sandy Alcantara is going to miss a big part of the season next year, and they lost some of their better offensive pieces. Josh Bell, for example, is a free agent. You just wonder, like, is that playing into Dave Dombrowski's offseason approach as well when he looks at it and he says, I think that we're, as constructed, still a contending team, is part of that because they've gotten to the playoffs the last 2 years, and now the road to the playoffs might be even a little easier.
I think, come on, going into the season, I think we knew they were going into the playoffs last year. And I think it's the same thing this year. If they play to half their potential, they're making the playoffs as the worst wild card. If they play anywhere above that, you never know. I mean, obviously, you want to see them win the NL East, but sometimes it's just not that easy because them and the Braves are almost growing up together. I feel like they're twins right now. And it's just one of those things where 2 teams are getting better every single year. And they're battling each other every single year. So I think it's going to, I definitely think it's coming down to the Braves and Phillies again for the NL East. I think it will come probably down to, I don't see a team like the Diamondbacks sneaking in again like that, like they did last year and taking out a team like the Phillies. I believe we're finally going to hopefully see that NLCS where it's the Phillies, it's the Braves, it's head-to-head battle and winner take all at that point.
Yeah, I'm going into this past October, everybody was saying that Phillies Braves series, they wished it was a best of 7 as opposed to the shorter series because of how well those teams match up. And yeah, they're going to be going at each other fiercely in 2024. I mean, the Braves are going to have so much incentive. The Braves are going to feel like the 49ers felt when they came in this past weekend to face the Eagles, where like they had the Eagles circled for about a year on their calendar.
Oh
And,
yeah.
hopefully the results of the head-to-heads in the regular season are different than that Eagles 49ers game went. But that's a topic for another day. Thanks a lot to Ricky Bo for joining the pod today and talking some winter meetings and Phillies activity. We'll be back here on the Phillies podcast pretty soon.